On this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we are talking awards. No Grizzlies awards this time around. It turns out, Damichael, it helps to be good at basketball to be considered for major end-of-season awards. The Grizzlies have been good in the past, though, and we believe they'll be good again. Can Ja Morant win the MVP next season? Will Jaren Jackson Jr. get back to DPOY form? And will Desmond Bane perhaps actually get that most improved player trophy himself? We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Our team each and every day. That is exactly right. We are Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. We are so grateful to have you with us wherever you're checking out the show, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, however you're checking out Locked On Grizzlies. We appreciate you being with us. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. Download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Again, we are free and available here at Locked On Grizzlies, wherever you get your podcast. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Check us out on YouTube. I mentioned Apple, Amazon, Spotify earlier. Damichael and I appreciate everybody that interacts with us in the comments, on X, whatever the case might be in social media. Make Locked On Grizzlies a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. And Damichael, I know you've been a busy guy, right? All this news breaking that you've been doing. You found time to watch Nikola Jokic play basketball in 2024 for some reason. I know what the reason is. I just thought it was funny that as part of your reporting of an actual Grizzlies player, potentially a former Grizzlies player, Nikola Jokic was part of that mix. But even in a time where you're supposed to be resting and relaxing, Damichael, they've got you working hard over there.
You know what? I'm a basketball guy.
You're a hooper.
I can't stay away from the game too much. My man Mitch said, I love the game. I love the hustle. And basketball is my sport. I love baseball, I love football. I love all the sports. But, the EuroLeague is, if you haven't watched the EuroLeague playoffs, that's for anyone out there. Like, it's good hoops going on over there. And it's nostalgia for the people who don't watch it. Like, you get to, like, I'm watching Scotty Wilbekin and Nigel Hayes. And, Mike James was playing for Monaco in that game. Just a bunch of players that you saw probably dominate at the collegiate level. And some play even in the NBA. It's fun. But Tarek Biberovic was the main reason I was tuning in, as you kind of
Tarek. Yes. And you're gaining and building ammunition for your eventual Luke Kennard trade you're going to suggest leading up to the draft. I'm on to you, Damichael Cole. I'm on to you. But no, it's good to be able to talk basketball with you every time I get a chance to talk basketball with you, partner. And today is a day that we're going to reflect on award season because Nikola Jokic was just recently named MVP of the National Basketball Association. Shaquille O'Neal apparently was not impressed, saying to Jokic, I respect your game, but SGA should have won. Right? Like that's a terrible Shaq impression. But we'll start with the MVP because that is the award that Jokic has won 3 of the last 4 years. In fact, the only reason Jokic hasn't won it 4 years in a row is Joel Embiid. You certainly can make an argument now with Jokic's third MVP. He's among the top 10, at worst, top 15 players in history when it comes to basketball. And the fascinating thing looking at the landscape of the NBA is you've got players like SGA in Oklahoma City. You've got Luka Doncic. Joel Embiid still exists, right? There's lots of talented guys. If Jalen Brunson keeps playing the way that he's playing for New York, you'd figure he would be in that conversation next season. And then in Memphis, you've got Ja Morant, who in theory is a top 10 to 15 player in the NBA. Is he ever, in your opinion, Damichael, going to be able to make a leap above all the names that I just mentioned, plus Jason Tatum? All of these guys that are pretty impressive basketball players. Haven't mentioned Devin Booker. Steph Curry still exists, right? There's so many phenomenal players in the NBA right now. When you look at the Grizzlies, Ja Morant has to be their number one possibility for an MVP. And just being on the court probably should be the focus. But do we think that Ja has it in him at this point to be an MVP type player? Maybe not in terms of like top 5, but do we think he can actually win the award?
We're going to take it all the way there. Like forget top 5, forget being a candidate, can he win the whole thing?
Can Joe, he be a guy that unseats a Jokic?
Yeah. You know what? The biggest hurdle is going to be the availability one.
Yeah, the biggest hurdle is Ja Morant.
Yeah. Look at his career up to this point. Rookie year, 67 games played. Since then, he has not topped 65 games in a season. And again, rookie year, 67. Like he barely surpassed that game. But 63 games, 57, 61 in the 3 seasons that preceded his rookie year. And then, of course, this year, only 9 games played. So he has to, overcome that more than anything, first and foremost. If he's able to do that, though, I think it's very possible. And here's why I think it makes sense. Number one, the Grizzlies have a good storyline going into next season. We know a lot of times, like if you go to last season, with all due respect to Joel Embiid, I think a lot of us can say there was some voter fatigue, as we like to go back to. And usually when voter fatigue kicks in with certain players, like Jokic had won back-to-back at that point, and it was, Embiid's having a really good year. And Embiid kind of earned it. They played head-to-head, and he beat up on Jokic, or whatever. But the point is sometimes voters get fatigued and say, if it's even, let's go to the guy who hasn't won it or whatever the case may be. That's not how I vote, but, I'm sure that's how some people think and whatnot. And I think
it's important to remember that voters for this are the media. Right. So who doesn't love a good narrative more than media members? No offense.
Exactly. And that's where Ja comes in. The storyline here from the potential bounce back. And the Grizzlies, we can talk about the past 2 number 2 seeds all we want, but people still aren't going to pencil them in as number 2 seed next season. I just don't see that happening in the preseason. So there's going to be a chance to have that rise where you finish as the top 3 seed. Ja Morant gets back in the all-star conversation. We know with Steph Curry kind of, I wouldn't say falling off, but the Warriors are falling off. And there's a direct, correlation to how that will impact how we look at Steph Curry. So with that being said, there's going to be some openings at the point guard position from how they're viewed, where Luka, Shea, and Ja will all be center of that conversation. And I don't know how you feel, Joe, but I feel like I'm comfortable putting Ja Morant in conversations with Luka and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So with that being said, Luka and Shai finished 2nd and 3rd in this previous in the Jokic won, but Shai was 2nd, Luka was 3rd. If they can finish 2nd and 3rd, why can't Ja Morant be right there too?
Well, between those 3 guards, one of those things is not like the other, right? And I think the biggest thing is the 3-point shooting. We talked about that on a recent episode. Ja being that true 3-level scorer like both SGA and Doncic can be. If he's able to do that, I think he's very much in that conversation. He has to develop that area of his game because he can't play the way that he has in the past. You mentioned he's only played more than 65 games once. That's not going to be enough. The greatest ability is availability. He has to be on the floor. I think he needs to play at or near that level for the Grizzlies to be a number 2 seed in this Western Conference. Because in just 1 year, Damichael, you've got the Denver Nuggets, who should be a top team until they're beaten, which might happen soon because the Minnesota Timberwolves are up 2-0 on those guys right now. Plus, that doesn't even mention the Oklahoma City Thunder, who almost certainly aren't going anywhere. The Dallas Mavericks likely will be picked in front of Memphis going into next season. There's lots of teams that we haven't even mentioned yet.
No. They're going to be the forgotten ones. They are.
Very likely they're going to be a play-in team in the eyes of many national media members. I disagree with that. I think the lowest they'll be is 5. But I really do think that teams are going to be looked beyond, or going to be put in front of Memphis because of all the turmoil they've experienced, depending on what they do with their roster. If they go into next season with Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. slotted to play 20 to 25 minutes a game, I think national media is going to hold that against Memphis. Whereas if they somehow find a way to bring in some veteran guys that have played at that level before, or a veteran big, right, like a Brook Lopez or somebody like that. I think that the media will give them a little more credit. But I'm interested in Ja Morant as an MVP candidate. Obviously, anybody listening to this podcast almost certainly is interested in Morant as an MVP candidate. Going into next season, let us know in the comments, do you have Morant as a top 5, top 10 kind of player in the NBA? Do you need to see him actually play basketball again first before you make such a distinction? I think that might be a fair way to look at it. But again, congratulations to Nikola Jokic. Maybe Ja Morant will be up next for that award. And that would mean, if he is, the Grizzlies probably had a pretty darn good season, which would be nice to see. Somebody who has won an award recently and played a lot of basketball recently is Jaren Jackson Jr. Rudy Gobert wins Defensive Player of the Year once again. Jaren, I don't believe, got a single vote this year, and that's understandable. Can Jaren return to his Defensive Player of the Year form? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at the wild and wonderful Yahoo Finance. It is a lot of fun over at Yahoo Finance because you can see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place. You can consolidate views from multiple accounts into one hub. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools that you need in one place. You can securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Check them out today. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, can Jaren Jackson Jr. get back to Defensive Player of the Year form? We'll talk about it next. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax with Damichael Cole, the wonderful Damichael Cole, the award-winning Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. The Hooper, Damichael Cole, committed to watching EuroLeague basketball when he's supposed to be resting, Damichael Cole. I'm Joe Mullinax. Happy to have you with us as always. In the first segment, we talked about Ja Morant as an MVP candidate going into next season. A lot of things got to break right, in my opinion, for Ja to be in that mix. But I don't think it's unlikely that those things happen, right? And that is an important thing. There's lots of pieces that have to fall in place, but I think there's a domino effect that can occur there. Same thing with Jaren Jackson Jr. And to be honest with you, the first domino that needs to fall for Jaren to get back in Defensive Player of the Year circles and conversations is Ja Morant being Ja Morant and being an MVP caliber player. Because if Ja can carry that offensive load, both as a creator of offense for himself and others, and as a shooter, a 3-level scorer, that allows for Jaren to lighten some of the load that he had to carry this season. Yeah. Jaren grew as a two-way player, Damichael, but the offensive reliance on him certainly hurt his defensive prowess.
There are so many great examples of what you just said, and two just popped right in my head. And they're wing guys, but it makes sense from the standpoint of, when your usage goes up on the offensive end, and I've talked to a lot of NBA players about this. Desmond Bane was talking about it. I remember when Dillon Brooks was out for a long stretch of time, and he had to defend, better offensive players, and how he was a little bit more tired, and it affects you on the offensive end. Des likes to run around a lot on the offensive end, does a lot of moving off the ball, and it's hard to do all of that move and then go on the other end and guard top tier players. So with that being said, Mikal Bridges and Kawhi Leonard just came to mind for me. Mikal Bridges was only 3-4 years ago. He finished top 3 in Defensive Player of the Year.
Widely viewed as one of the best perimeter defenders in the entire NBA.
Without a doubt. Kawhi Leonard, he won 2, right?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Yeah, he won 2 of them. And if you look at Kawhi's advanced defensive numbers now, they're down a little bit. But if you eye test it, when it's one-on-one and it's 8 seconds on the shot clock and you got to get past Kawhi Leonard, it's tough as it's ever been. But the point is he's having to conserve more energy. So the numbers are going to go down. Now you don't see his name anywhere close to, Defensive Player of the Year conversations. And even Mikal Bridges, who from an availability standpoint is different, because with Kawhi, he hasn't been available so much. Well, Mikal Bridges has never missed a game in his NBA career. But at the same time, he's even said it. I've heard him talk about it on podcasts and interviews and things like that, where it's different from when he was in Phoenix because Devin Booker and Chris Paul did all of the ball handling. And, he catch and shoot on offense, do some cutting here and there. But his main assignment was defensively slowing down the Lucas or whoever, Curry, whoever the best player was on that end. Now you're in Brooklyn. You're a higher focus on the offensive end. Now his defense is, he's still, again, just like I said with Kawhi Leonard, 7 seconds on the shot clock. And they got to bend their knees and exert a little more energy. They can do it. Like, it doesn't change anything talent-wise. It's just an energy thing. And that all leads me back to, with Jaren. Can he return to the form? I think so. And that's part of it, what we just mentioned. But, Joe, I think there's another part that you probably can hit on a little bit, too, is from the standpoint of it's a personnel thing, too, with Jaren Jackson Jr. And, you've been team, what you call it, fee, fi, fo, fum.
Fee, fi, fo, fum.
Yeah, you've been team fee, fi, fo, fum. Put another big alongside of Jaren. And I think if the Grizzlies go that route, we could get more to the role that Jaren played when he was a defensive player of the year, not just last season, but the year before that when he was a top 5 candidate, in the same category. So both of those seasons, he had Steven Adams protecting the back line, which gave him more freedom to, roam around and things like that and get a lot of those weak side blocks and blocks from behinds and things like that. So that's what I think it comes down to. If the Grizzlies address this center position correctly and it's someone that they're comfortable saying, hey, Jaren, you can roam around because if they get past you, they still got to get past that guy. He'll be right back in the conversation.
I talked about it last week in my Jaren Jackson Jr. review. The idea of Jaren at power forward being best for Jaren.
Yeah.
At center, it might be best for the Memphis Grizzlies, right? Because he's still an impactful defender. He's still somebody that plays at a high level on that end. But it enables Memphis to do more switchability-wise. Mm-hmm. It allows for Memphis to have more offensive versatility potentially. We floated the idea in the past, and others have as well, of GG Jackson being a 4. Like, imagine a Ja Morant, Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, GG Jackson, Jaren Jackson Jr. 5. That is a lot of versatility. Mm-hmm. And all 5 of those dudes can handle the ball, right? So I think that is something that is important to keep in mind. And that is part of this overall offseason vision. Do the Grizzlies see him as that 5 and they put him there as the starter, or do they keep him at the 4 and you bring in team V5 Fo Fum, whether it's Klingon or somebody else? I am of the mind that I would like to see Jaren at the 4 because we have tangible evidence that he is really good and the Grizzlies are really good in those scenarios. You could argue theoretically Memphis will be better with him at the 5, but we haven't seen it manifest yet. And again, I'm going to continue to keep saying it. Are you trying to win a championship or not? I'm not necessarily worried about getting to those playoff games because they have to get back to the playoffs first. But once you get into 2025 and you have the trade deadline coming up and all those sorts of things, and you figure out what you need, that is the place where you start thinking about you need 16-game guys. Maybe that is where you go and you make a move to try to get a wing or something along those lines, or another big, whatever the case might be. I think that is very possible for this front office. They go into next season essentially running it back, taking the best player available. If it's Castle from UConn instead of Klingon, so be it, right? I wouldn't necessarily do that, but I see the vision for a player like Castle. If they go down that path and then at the deadline they decide they need a big, maybe they make that deal. I think that they are going to invest in Jaren in a way that they want to have him as the 5. And that would enable them to perhaps grow their stature. Guys like Adam Pike and Matt Hardlicka on X talk about how so many of these good teams are 5-out offenses. We've talked about that before as well, Damichael. If you subscribe to that logic, the easiest way to get there for Memphis is with Jaren at the 5. Yeah. But you need to find rebounding somewhere. You have to find spacing somewhere because we know Jaren is not that consistent three-point threat, at least not right now. So in theory, Jaren being the 5 is best for Memphis, but it's not best for his Defensive Player of the Year candidacy. I think the only way he gets back in that conversation, Damichael, is if he's playing the 4 because he'll rack up blocks and steals and the numbers that it takes, especially for a big, to overcome a guy like Rudy Gobert. You got to put up those numbers. Oh, and by the way, Bam Adebayo and Victor Wembanyama aren't going anywhere.
Yeah, Victor Wembanyama, man. I mean, we're talking about defensive
He
player of
might
the
win
year.
defensive player of the year awards in a row.
It's going to take a lot to oversee him. I think he finished second, I believe, in this one. And I mean, he's finishing second already as a rookie.
Impressive stuff. So I think Jaren will be in that conversation. But again, so much of Jaren being in that mix has to do with what Memphis sees him as moving forward. And that is the question of the offseason, right? Is Jaren a 4? Is Jaren a 5? How does the front office answer that question? Do they bring in a big just to, be a fourth guy off the bench and be a 20-minute eater of minutes as a big in that way, and Jaren starts at the 5? Or do they bring in a starting caliber center? That is a major piece of this offseason that will be addressed as it grinds forth, of course. Thank you so much again for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. When we come back, we're going to talk about Desmond Bane. Does he have a little Tyrese Maxey in him? Can he earn that Most Improved Player award? I believe Ja Morant gave him one a couple years back. Can Dez actually earn it himself? We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, Damichael Cole and I were having wonderful conversations about the Memphis Grizzlies, Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. We're not screaming at you. We're not losing our minds, giving off egregious hot takes. That's because that's how the Locked On Podcast Network does it. And if you like Locked On Grizzlies, you're probably going to love Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also check it out on Amazon Fire under the free channels portion of the app. All the great analysis of the Locked On Network, both in terms of individual teams as well as overall leagues at large. Locked On Sports Today. Make sure you're checking it out as soon as possible, either on YouTube or on Amazon Fire TV. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monopoly Go, and I know what you're thinking. Goodness gracious, you guys talk a ton about Monopoly Go. Let's settle on this game conversation, but we just have to let you guys know all the amazing things that are going on in the game. Teaming up with friends for time tournaments, working together with building boards. And the more that you win together, the more you can lock awesome prizes like hilarious emojis for taunting your friends, cool new game pieces to travel across boards with, and unique stickers that you can trade with folks to complete albums for big prizes. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day because there's constantly changing tournaments, challenges. It's like a whole new world each and every time you open the app with unique mini games like digging for treasure, as well as a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events to help you win big. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, like massive multipliers in everything you win, or even rent frenzies. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or on the App Store. Monopoly Go, game on. Check it out. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out this episode, talking Desmond Bane, Most Improved Player. Maybe, maybe not. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning writer for that publication. Amazing work from Damichael. He broke some news over there over the last couple of days. You probably, hopefully, checked out the Wednesday edition of the show. If you haven't done so, make sure you're checking out everything Damichael does over on X at DamichaelC. If you want to see me make people mad by talking about random draft prospects, you can check out at Joe Mullinax on X as well.
No, you've been doing good lately.
Yeah, I made somebody mad. I respect Adam Pike a good bit as a writer. I enjoy his work, but he talked about a guy that is not top 70 on lots of boards, and he. But again, it's not just him. It's Matt Hardlicka. Maybe that's a subject for an episode down the road, because not everybody here is on X or social media. But the idea of what we like in prospects maybe is a fair way to put it. Maybe we can get Matt or Adam to come on and talk to us about that. But anyway, regardless, this isn't a draft episode. We're talking about end-of-season awards. Can Ja win the MVP? How does Jaren get back into the Defensive Player of the Year conversation? And Damichael, we're closing out this episode looking at Bane as a most improved player. You've talked about Bane. You had the individual season review episode for Dez. You talked about a lot of the things that you wanted to see him get better at. He's talked himself about being a better isolation scorer. But what beyond those aspects do you think he needs to do to get into the most improved player conversation? And I think that there is a distinction to make there. And it's also one of the most ambiguous awards. Like Ja Morant a couple of years back, and people already kind of saw Ja as a star that had arrived. Probably make the same argument for Tyrese Maxey to an extent.
You can.
He just won it this past season. So I'm curious as to your perspective on what Bane would need to do to make such a leap for himself to get into this award consideration.
So here's my case when it comes to this thing. It's not the most improved award. That's just a name that's on the trophy. This award is for the player who takes the most advantage of an increased opportunity. That's what the award is for. All in all, Tyrese Maxey, no James Harden. You get the ball in your hands, take advantage. You look at the other candidates, Kobe White, Lonzo Ball's hurt. It's your time to shine. Kobe White didn't just come out of anywhere. I mean, a couple years ago, he was averaging 13 points a game. So, and you can go down the list to other players. But guys who I think of when I think of most improved are like Jalen Johnson. Just went from 5 points a game with the Hawks to being the starting power forward and being someone who they're actively keeping out of trade talks. Now, that's what you call a most improved type of player. But tangent aside, getting to the conversation with Desmond Bane. Here's where I stand. If he's to win this award, which I just don't see happening, it'd have to be complete narrative. Like we talked about Ja Morant possibly having a narrative. If Jaren Jackson Jr. in the Defense Player of the Year conversation, there would be some narrative stuff there. But none of those guys would need a bigger narrative push than Desmond Bane. Why? Because the narrative around Desmond Bane this season, and even though he still didn't get talked about a lot nationally, but when people did mention him, they brushed off his numbers. We saw it, Joe. I mean, everyone tuning in to this podcast, you watch Desmond Bane shoot step back threes. You watch Desmond Bane get trapped out of pick and rolls and things like that and still manage to have like a 49-point game against the Pistons and other big nights where he would consistently put up 25, 5, and 5. You saw it when Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. were playing alongside of him, and he still, I mean, I can't point it out enough. Desmond Bane's points per game were higher when Ja Morant played in those 9 games than when Ja Morant was off the floor. So it's not a situation where we're talking about, oh, Ja's going to get back and his numbers are going to go down. That didn't just happen. His numbers went up. So with all that being said, I think there's a narrative from the standpoint of if people can rally around the idea of him maybe potentially developing, like if you talk about what he needs to improve at, which you mentioned, fourth quarter scoring is something it's kind of disappeared, and the Grizzlies as a whole disappeared because they're not good isolation scorers, so to speak. That's something he can kind of become like one of those closer type players, and that'll kind of put his name in the conversation to me. I don't think his numbers have to go up drastically. If he gets to 25 points a game, stays at around 5 assists, and kind of develops into one of the best fourth quarter scorers, and his stats automatically contribute to winning, which they will. We've seen too much examples of that happening. He can be in the conversation. I'm not sure about him winning it simply because of the fact this is a guy we talked about who finished top 5 in this award before. This is actually the year that Ja won it. And, you touched on it earlier with Ja actually, jokingly giving the award to Desmond Bane and Bane giving it right back to him.
I think it's more likely both for Ja and for Bane that one of them wins the clutch award, right? I could see that if isolation scoring is going to be such a focus in the Western Conference, is going to be such a bloodbath.
Yeah.
Seriously, all of the teams in the Western Conference, except for maybe one, are going to actively be trying to win next season. There's not going to be any nights off. I do think that there's a lot to be said for what those guys are going to have to do with the ball in their hands. And if they do it consistently, again, the clutch award is relatively new. It's certainly not on the level of MVP or most improved, but I could see that being in the mix for both of those guys as well. I'm really intrigued by what the Grizzlies are going to do with the Bane and Ja pairing, because you're exactly right. Those two guys play really well together, and I think that they'll continue to grow. But how they utilize them and move forward with them in whatever the rotation looks like, right? Like there's just so much unknown with Vince Williams Jr. and GG Jackson. The usage that GG will need in order to be an actual competent rotation player on a championship contender, how you divvy that up is going to be fascinating. And I wonder if Bane is better equipped to deal with that because of the levels to his scoring as opposed to Ja.
Yeah, and I can see that because I do see a situation where, we talk a lot about Marcus Smart kind of being the de facto backup point guard. Why can't it be Desmond Bane?
I think it most certainly can.
I think you'd make that argument, Joe. You've talked about how good Marcus Smart is off the ball as compared to on the ball. I think you can make an argument and say, hey, in rotations, Ja plays, the first 9-10 minutes of the game. Then he sits the last 2 minutes of the second quarter. And Desmond Bane, plays the first 6 minutes of the first quarter, takes a break, and then he comes in with a couple minutes left in the first quarter when Ja goes out, and then carries the offense into the early part of the second quarter until Ja gets back. I think you can stagger those two and get efficient offense. We just mentioned how not only did his points go up, his assists per game went up when he was playing alongside of Ja. Ja's not taking the ball out of Desmond Bane's hands too much as well.
They're really a wonderful pairing together, Ja and Dez. And thankfully, they're going to be together for some time moving forward in Memphis. So regardless of the award considerations for next year, all three of these guys, just having them back on the floor together for consistency is going to make a major difference as the Grizzlies try to get back into the playoff conversation in the Western Conference. Thank you guys so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're subscribing, liking, commenting, rating, reviewing. Make sure you are on YouTube, on Apple, on Spotify, on Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, as well as on Amazon Fire TV. Lots of amazing things that are happening with Locked On right now. Going into our Friday edition of the show, Damichael, there's lots of stuff going on in the NBA playoffs. Maybe we can take a quick gander at that. Maybe we can do a quick mock draft update and take a look at some of those things. Just maybe kind of a look around the league. Perhaps.
Joe, at some point we got to talk about your guy. We got to talk about Mike Conley at some point. I mean, Kyle Anderson's over there too, but we know Mike Conley in Grizzlies lore is he's one of those ones, as people like to say. I mean, what he's doing. I don't know if you saw the quote, Joe, but it hit me in the heart as a kid growing up watching the Grizzlies. But before the playoffs started, paraphrasing, Mike Conley basically said something like, I know you guys are young and you'll have plenty shots at this, but I don't know how many more times I got. So do this for me. That's what he said. Do this for me. And look at what the Timberwolves are doing.
Oh, Captain, my captain. I think Ja Morant's fantastic. He's clearly better than Mike Conley. I'm not going to make that argument again. But I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Mike Conley, 100%. So I think a good look around the league on a Friday sounds like a good final week, end of week edition of the podcast for us. So for Damichael, I'm Joe. Make sure you're hanging out with us tomorrow, talking about Mike Conley. Hey, if I get a chance to talk about Mike Conley, I'm going to do it. Maybe we'll do a mock draft roundup, that sort of thing. Check in on the status of the NBA playoffs and more, all that on our Friday episode. Thank you for being with us here on a Thursday. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe to Locked On Grizzlies, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great rest of your day. We'll catch you next time.